everyone. Thank you for joining. Some people are still getting online, so we'll get started in just a minute or two. If you can hear me and see our slide deck that starts with Salesforce and Workato, if you could just mention that in the chat or post a question just so I can make sure that there's no technical difficulties, I'd greatly appreciate it. Oh, awesome. Thank you, David. We'll have about one more minute and then we'll get started. All right, we might still have a few people joining, but I think we're going to get started. I want to make the best use of everyone's time today. Thank you very much for joining here. This webinar is going to be about Salesforce and Workato. We're going to talk about some really great stuff. Ishan, if you can move to the next slide, please. So before we kick things off, I just wanted to welcome everyone here to Workato's Product Hour. This actually happens every other week on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So we actually have some exciting topics coming up in the near future about advanced integrations with Salesforce, kind of like a phase 2 to today's call. Integrations with NetSuite, integrations with Workday, where we'll do a little bit more deeper dive for those particular applications. And you can register for those now. If you go to product.workato.com, you can then see all of the different product hours that we have upcoming. And if you're not able to make the call, if you register, you'll still get a copy of the recording. So you might not be able to attend it live, but you'll still be able to get the information. Next slide, thank you. So who am I? My name is Sharon Clardy. I'm a Director of Strategic Projects here at Workato. I have been in the Salesforce ecosystem in almost all possible capacities for the last 10 years. I actually run a local user group here. I co-lead a user group in New Hampshire, and I have an honor of being a Salesforce MVP. So I'm super excited to see so many of you here today. Looking to see how you can take the power of Salesforce and combine that with the power of the Workato platform and really create some magic for your organizations. I am joined here today by my partner in crime, Ishan Sim. Ishan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ishan, Product Manager with Workato. I focus on connectors, functionality, and usability. I'm also heavily involved with the Workato's developer program. Really looking forward to explore the product with everyone today.
Thank you, Ishan. Before we get started, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded. The link to the recording will be sent out shortly after the webinar is done. So if you have anybody in your team who wasn't able to make the webinar today, please make sure you share that link with them. We also have a questions box, so we definitely encourage you to do that. I'll be answering questions during the webinar, and for some of them I might answer privately, others will answer kind of broadly for the group. If we're not able to get to all the questions, we will still follow up with you after the call, so you will get an answer to your question. So I think with that, we can get started. So the agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of an overview about Workato and Salesforce and how that fits together, and then talk about some specific use cases. And when we talk about those use cases, we are going to highlight some of the key product features that make those use cases come to life. And then we'll have some extra time at the end for Q&A. So please ask those questions as you have them, because we'll answer questions during the time of that particular use case, but we'll save a little bit of time at the end as well. So you'll hear Ishan and myself kind of rave about Workato. I mean, we love it. We absolutely love the product, and I think that's going to come through in this webinar. But we work here, so you might want to hear about some other individuals who love Workato and use Salesforce. And we have an enormous base of customers who are just thriving, automating and integrating, and making a real impact and difference to their organization by using platforms such as Salesforce and combining that with Workato and a number of their other applications. So we process over 4 billion events during the year. We have 21,000 plus organizations using Workato. And one of the factors that we actually really proud of here is that we've over 12,000 app admins, analysts, and business users or business operations users who are using the Workato platform. So it's not just the highly technical resources. We have those as well, but you don't have to have a degree in computer science in order to use the platform. And I think that's going to come through today in today's webinar. And that you don't actually have to hit the ground running with a blank slate. You can create something on your own, or you can actually leverage what our community of recipe builders have built as well with our 10,000 integrations that you can use and leverage right from the start. And if you have a need for some other opinions, we would love for you to check out our App Exchange listing. We're very proud of that as well. So today we're going to talk about a few different use cases, but we wanted to open up this conversation to talk about kind of a little bit higher level, a little bit more broader view of what customers who use Salesforce are doing with Workato and other applications inside their organization. So, when you think about that, kind of compartmentalizing these different functional areas within your business, some of the really popular use cases that we see from our customers are around processing, financial hubs, things like quote to cash and payment management, and connecting Salesforce with applications such as Workday or Oracle E-Business Suite, SAP and NetSuite and Intact and others. And so one of the things that I want to make sure that you come away with today, while we'll be going over a few specific use cases that will have certain app pairs in design, that if you use a different application, it will fit right in. And while you'll see the recipes that we put together and the integrations that we put together, maybe using NetSuite or ServiceNow, if you're using Workday and Atlassian, that will fit right in. So the use case will still be applicable to you and your organization, even if the applications we're showing are not the ones that you're using. So when you think about what your business uses for kind of these key applications to help keep your business running, as well as those niche applications that are very specific to a specific department, you can start to come up with some really interesting use cases on how to make a difference with your integrations and automations. And so Workato has hundreds of applications, and you can even extend that in thinking about Workato as having thousands, because one of the features that Workato has is the ability to connect to other applications via API using a very user-friendly methodology. And that's something we might take a look at in our advanced Salesforce integration webinar on the 8th of February. So, I hope that, you guys can get something out of today. And if you guys want to send in a question with some of the key applications that you're using, we can possibly tailor the content to the webinar to highlight some use cases around that. So we'd love to hear that from you guys as well. So this first use case that we're going to kind of look at here is order to cash. And Ishan is actually going to build a recipe live. And so we call our integrations and automations recipes. So Ishan is going to go get cooking and create an order to cash use case live here on the webinar. And let's go do that, Ishan.
Thank you, Sharon. So this is a business process that is very popular with our customers. Almost every Salesforce user with us has, to some extent, a quote to cash recipe. So what we're going to do today is take a deep look at how we can accomplish this and look at the various features of our Salesforce connector that makes this process easy and quick. So let me just switch my screen over to the end product. So let's take a look. This is
One
what.
thing I'm going to add, Ishan, here is if anybody needs to zoom in, it's a feature on GoToWebinar that not everybody notices. In the top box of your GoToWebinar, there's a zoom option that you can zoom in just a little bit more in the event that the screen looks a little small for you.
Perfect. Thanks, Sharon, for catching that. Okay, so what we're seeing here is it's a recipe that that is prepared. But today we're gonna start from scratch. We're gonna go from a new recipe and kind of end up in this state together. Okay, so let's take a look at building this recipe out from the new page. Okay, a Workato recipe would always start with a trigger, and from just for this use case, we're going to pick Salesforce as the source application. So let's go do that, and let's pick a new object trigger. So the Salesforce trigger, it's a generic one, so meaning that we can deal with all kinds of objects, standard, custom, even platform event objects. So the very first thing that we're going to see is we're going to ask you for a connection. So I have here a couple, and I'm going to pick one that I prepared for this demo. Let's move on to the next part of this recipe creation wizard. What we're going to ask you is to pick an object that we're working with in this case. So over here, just for today, we're going to work with the opportunity project object, and it's going to go back in the Salesforce and load a couple of things. So what you can see here is a bunch of optional fields, and this I want to go into this real quick here. There is an option to perform some form of SQL queries. This really helps to streamline the process by picking out only objects that you want to put through this recipe. We can really filter and keep this precise by adding where conditions such as this to only pick up let's say I only want to pick up close one opportunities from here, but this can also be done from another feature in Workato, which I'm going to show you next. So I'm not going to go through this whole process because I believe I can qualify as an expert here, so I'm going to just skip to the full recipe view. So at this point, what I want to do is say, hey, I don't want to pick up all new opportunities. I only want to pick those that are close one, right? In that case, I'm going to go select a trigger filter and select only opportunities with stage name that's close one. So I'm going to say this equals close one. And just by doing that, the Workato trigger would intelligently filter out any new opportunities that is pulled that happens in Salesforce, and only put through those that are close and one, right? So when we think about quote to cash, we always think opportunities straight into like an invoice or a sales order. But there are a couple of things that from a best practice perspective that we have to think about also. First, we need to think about, okay, what are the products associated to this opportunity, right? So what we're going to do here is to make sure that we pull all opportunities products associated with this opportunity, and we do that by first going to Salesforce and let's get related objects. Okay, and here what we're going to do is let's pick a group of opportunity products. Opportunity product. And we're going to select only products that are associated with this opportunity. And just doing so the Salesforce connector is intelligent enough that we make this association and pull a list of related objects that only belong to this opportunity. Now, the next thing we need to think about is, okay, this opportunity is associated to a particular account in Salesforce that is linked to a customer in our NetSuite instance. So before we create a sales order for this customer, we need to make sure that this customer exists in NetSuite. So what I'm going to do here is to perform a search in NetSuite for this customer. And of course, once again, with any new application that introduced with a recipe, we'll always ask for connections. So we can go back into your instance, pull all custom fields that are available in your instance, as well as all the custom objects and all the nuances that will kind of customize this experience to your instance. So here, what we're going to do is ignore all these and pick up of course, first we want to select the standard the object, the business object that we're working with. So let's go ahead and pick customer. Okay, at this point, what we want to do is search this NetSuite customer based on the linked Salesforce account. So what we want to do is search it based on external ID. By doing so, what we're going to do is say, hey, I want to search by this account ID, and we can do it so here. So in the event that this doesn't work in your case, your external IDs are not your NetSuite may or may not be completely synced with your Salesforce instance. Not to worry. What we can do is also do a search based on customer name, for example, or company name associated with this customer. And in this case, we can do a name match with the account that's also associated with this new opportunity. And what I want to do is direct your attention here to this feature that we call stitch schema. So what we've done is, we've performed a lot of this heavy lifting at the back, and we've extracted out information that doesn't come directly through the API. We've tried to put pieces that make sense together, so it becomes we accelerate this integration process and makes your job easier. We only want to focus on things that are important to you. So how this translates to a good recipe experience is that you'll be able to pick up the associated account details without performing an extra action. So in this case, we can simply map the account name to this company name without having to perform another search for this account. Right. So now that we've made sure that this customer exists, what we want to do is, have a conditional action and say, hey, if this customer doesn't exist, we do so with a conditional action saying, if this is not present, what we want to do is go ahead and create this customer in our NetSuite, just so we don't run into any issues when creating a sales order for this customer.
I would like to add something there. So when you're thinking about designing and building recipes, you can start to see here how you can start to build out some logic to help you what I would call fail gracefully. So, when you're building out these, it's not just about moving data from point A to point B, it's about doing it in an intelligent and automated way. So that now that with this constructs that Workato gives you, you can do that with this logic patterns of saying, like, if this happens, go do this. But if that happened, I want you to go do these things over here, and allow you a lot of flexibility to design so that you're not kind of having to clean up when those errors happen, that you can really start to plan for those but not in a code-based or technical way. It's in a very kind of logically oriented, kind of very easy to read manner.
Yep. So thank you, Sharon. So coming back to this, what we want to do now is to make sure that all these opportunity products related to this opportunity exist in the NetSuite instance. So, but at the same time, we're hit with another problem. This, a single opportunity can be related to one or more products. So how do we handle this one-to-many relationship, right? This is usually the case, and it becomes a bit of an issue with a customer. So what I want to introduce to you now is this concept of a repeat action. We're able to handle lists or collections of records and process them one at a time. So right here, what we're going to do is say, hey, let's go through this list of products related to this opportunity, and we're going to do the same thing here. Let's make sure that it exists in our NetSuite instance before going ahead with the final step of creating this object. So what we want to do is search standard object. No, not address here. We want to make sure that the inventory item exists. And what we're going to do is search by inventory name, the display name of this inventory. And once again, we're going to pick out data from this loop and not from the original list, because we're dealing with a loop here. And I won't go into details with the mapping, but similarly, what we're going to do is add a conditional action, just so this recovery and rerun step is easy. So from this search, we want to make sure that it exists, and if it doesn't, we're gonna create this in our NetSuite instance. Gonna create not a sales order. I'm gonna do an inventory item creation. Okay, let's assume we've gone through all the mappings and it's all done right. So at this point, we're good to go. We're gonna make the action to create the sales order in the NetSuite, to sync it over. Now, what I want to draw your attention to here is this really neat feature where we kind of predict what may work for you. In this case, we can see that the sales order was kind of predicted and put as as the highly preferred next step. So this makes it really convenient, and it really accelerates this integration process. So and it kind of leads us towards what makes sense, what is the next business step that makes sense for us. So here we're gonna continue, and firstly pick out the fields that make sense, right? We want to make sure that the item ID is available, the quantity, things like the price or the price rate, the amount, is it taxable or not, and things like that. Now, let's not spend time doing the mapping. What I want to draw your attention to next is the fact that at the end of this process, your record from Salesforce is going to go to NetSuite. That's all done right. But what we want to do is keep this integration bi-directional. We want both Salesforce and NetSuite to not just be in sync in terms of the data. We want to have a reference back both ways. So NetSuite has this interesting concept of external IDs, and it's not something available in Salesforce out of the box. So what we see our users do commonly as a best practice is to create a custom field in the Salesforce instance to kind of store external reference IDs or keys from the destination application, and they kind of sync it back and link the opportunities to this external object. So how that's done is to perform a simple update at the end of this recipe in Salesforce. And let's give it a moment to load. Once again, we see that the recipe recommends updating the object and is recommending that we update the original object that got pulled in by the trigger. So here we have the opportunity available. What we're going to do is say, okay, the opportunity we're looking at is the one that came in the trigger, the very same one. And now what I've done is added a custom field called NetSuite Sales Order ID, and that is what we're going to use here. So what you can see, and it's not directly obvious, is that all custom fields that belong to this opportunity object was actually introspected by our framework, and we present it to users very conveniently. So there's no need to configure your schema manually with the Salesforce connector.
Ishan says introspective. I say auto magically. It's more fun that way. Thank you, Ishan. This has been absolutely fantastic. Do you think maybe we could see it in action?
Of course. So yeah, with the interest of time, I'll draw attention back to the recipe that I've prepared. And I'm just gonna do a single run of this recipe to show you, show everyone here how what it does and what it looks like. Test a recipe after you're building it. Building recipes is always an iterative process. You're never gonna get it right the first time. So there's always this concept of testing, looking at the result of this test, the job that was created using this test, looking at the actual data process, going into your applications, checking that the values were met properly, the right relationships were created through that run of the recipe. So here we see a new job came through. And before we dive into the what happened through the job, I want to draw your attention to this really neat feature called custom reports. We can really nicely create columns in this job tab for jobs that information about this job that makes sense. Here, what we've done is sync the opportunity name, how much was involved, the amount involved in this, as well as when this opportunity was closed. So of course we can always add more. We may want to say, okay, what is the sales order that was created? Yeah, we can always do that. So now let's take a look at the job that went through and the things that were done through this. Okay, so we see the object came through, and this is the full data. The opportunity that we've created just now. So I'd like to draw your attention to see the job report. We can always see, okay, what was the input that was actually sent? Because from a recipe design perspective, it's difficult to tell what the actual values are going to be sent when we're only mapping the data, right? And also we can very nicely, conveniently see the output of each action. So in this search action, we've picked out a list of products that belong to this opportunity. Yep. And also in destination applications, we can see very detailed information, and these are kind of the raw information that came through the recipe and through the connectors. So what I also want to show you here is that there is there's a very detailed breakdown of the actions that were executed in a job. So in this case, we went through this loop, and we only went through it once because there was only one item linked to this opportunity. We performed a search for this product to pull out all information. We did a search in NetSuite to make sure that this object exists, and it looked like the search found something, which is so the condition action returned a false, which is good for us. There's no need to create a new action here. And finally, we did a create of the sales order. So in this case, it wasn't created because we found that this sales order actually exists. So there was no need to create a duplicate of it. So this is a form of defensive design in your recipe that can prevent a lot of hours spent removing unusable data from either one of your applications. So yeah, this is kind of that's how Workato is able to sync data across multiple objects with very complex relationships, like a quote to cash use case, and speed up integration design for our users. So at this point, are there any questions from the audience?
Yeah, we actually have 2 questions here. So one question is from Sally. She noticed that when you were building the recipe, that on the right side of the screen in that side box, that looked like there was some data with each of the fields, and like that data might have come from Salesforce. And if you could share a little bit more about that or how that happens.
Oh, that is a fantastic question. So let me just navigate back to the recipe screen to show everyone what that is precisely. So what we can see here on this right, this is what we call an output data tree. This is a set of fields that are available for mapping, either from previous steps or just from your account properties. So what we saw earlier was a set of data that looks like it might have come from Salesforce. This is what we call sample data, and these are actually just to put it out there, these are real data. This actual data that came from the Salesforce instance that's connected, that we chose for connection. So what we do is whenever we display this output data tree, we also at the same time perform a single request to extract information from the latest record for this object in your instance, and we present it, map it to the appropriate output, and present it as information for you. This is useful in a number of ways. It really helps you to be assured that you're doing the right thing, and that choosing this object really shows that, okay, now I'm actually doing the right thing. This looks right, so I can move on to the next step with some form of confidence without being too worried about, okay, is this the right relationship? Are we doing the right things here?
Yeah, and the other thing that I'll add on to that is that it's also helpful when you look at it and you actually see how Salesforce is storing that data. So sometimes the way that you see the data when you're in Salesforce looking at a field is not the way that the data is actually stored under the covers. And since Workato is kind of accessing the under the covers of Salesforce, you'll see that such as last modified date, that it's stored in a very specific format. So that helps you give you a little bit of insight without digging into jobs and getting into the weeds there, saying, okay, what format is Salesforce sharing this data with me, so that I then know if I need to do something with it to transform it so that I can send it somewhere else and have it be in the format that it's needed. So it's another useful way of using that sample data, which also kind of lends itself to the next question from Stephen. And the overall gist of the question is if I need to check for like an account name, if it exists, is there a way to do some fuzzy matching to figure out a name if the name exists in the database? Or are there ways to do some type of scripting with like Python or JavaScript or anything like that? So Ishan, is that something you can share some light on?
Yeah, of course. That if it really depends on the kind of service that is available for matching. In rare cases, users have some form of third-party service that really does this matching for you, or users would generally perform some form of a search with multi-criteria. You want to make sure that you're matching as an example, I want to match first by company name, and if it's not available, maybe I'll match by first name and last name. So that can be built into the recipe as design with multiple search steps. We may sometimes want to search for the second customer with instead of company name, we might just want to go with first name or something. Yeah.
And then I would say, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ethan.
Yeah, and also, one of the really sweet features in Workato recipes is the ability to perform formula, right?
That's where I was going to
go. Yeah, sometimes we want to say, hey, company name from, okay, not here in this case, right? I mean, from account. So maybe sometimes, just for example, the account name might not be present. So hey, if it's not present, I want to do something. If it's not present, I'm gonna make use of the, perhaps what do we have here? Let's look. Yeah, perhaps just the name of the opportunity. So. And so, yeah, we can perform some form of simple validation logic just in line, in just within this input field to really help overcome some of these corner cases that happen. So when we see users with thousands of rows coming in every day, chances are we're going to get a couple of misbehaving rows or records that will be that will cause you some trouble. So having a practice like this would really help you eliminate those failed jobs.
Yeah, and so that's something that getting familiar with the formula feature and the 400 plus different ways that you can transform your data or do inline logic is something that will take your recipe building kind of to the next level. Stephen, it looks like you have a couple more questions on that, and we can take that offline and follow up with you on more questions about kind of that fuzzy logic. In the interest of time here, Isha, why don't we jump over to the recipe for case management use case?
Okay, so the next scenario that we prepared is also another really popular use case that we see among our Salesforce user, and that's the case management scenario. We want to make sure that your service management system or application is kind of in sync with your sales application. You want to make sure that there's no gap in knowledge and understanding between different teams. So one of the really popular applications that we see with a lot of our users is ServiceNow as an incident tracking tool with Salesforce as the sales-facing case management application. So let me, with the interest of time, just jump straight into the recipe that I've prepared. What we see here is, hey, whenever there's a new case in Salesforce, we wanna go into ServiceNow. And of course, just like we've mentioned earlier, we can also apply some form of SQL query. We can say, hey, I want to make sure that the priority level is high, right? Only bring high priority issues from Salesforce. The rest, we don't want to involve them in this integration scenario. So as always, we recommend performing a search before doing any form of writing to your destination application. We don't want to create duplicate records, or we don't want to be updating the wrong records in a recipe. So here, very simply, we perform a search record. We want to be searching for the number, and in this case, perhaps we can say, hey, case number matches the incident number in ServiceNow. Then we go and say, hey, if this information is already present, let's not create a new one. Let's just update the existing one. And how we do so is, we say, hey, this is the ID of the incident that already exists. I'm going to map the description and the subject. And right over here, that there's no need to map the number, because that's kind of the field that we're using to kind of map them. And just to complete the use case, we say, hey, if the search returns nothing, what we're going to do is create a new incident. And over here, I have forgotten to include the number. So what we want to do is, with new records, we want to sync this foreign key that is going to keep them together, and make sure that we have some form of external reference in every one of your records. Right, I'm going to hit save here. So again, I'm going to do a test just to take a look at what happens in this scenario. So again, this report can be customized. In this case, what I've shown is just the case ID and incident ID between these two the two systems.
Okay, thanks, it looks like. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so it looks like there are no new cases found in this Salesforce instance. So why don't we just go ahead and look at the job that was already processed earlier. Okay, yeah, here we see, the case came in with all the information available from the case object in Salesforce. We did a search, right? It showed some records, so we know that this record existed. So here we're going to perform an update instead of a create, and we can see the output of that. We'll be able to see that, hey, the incident went through, an update was done instead of a create, because we found an existing record.
So Ishan, a question has come in. Jody asked if there was any limit to the number of different applications that you could have in a recipe.
Oh, that is a great question as well. So let's just navigate back to this recipe to really answer this question. Okay, so there is absolutely no limit to the number of applications that you may want to include in a single recipe. We can always add a new step and choose another system. Perhaps we want to sync it to some form of your own database, a SQL server that we store somewhere, or in this case, other downstream applications that's involved with this workflow. Additionally, we can also work with multiple instances of Salesforce. And how we do that is, we can say, hey, for large companies that have more than one Salesforce instance, what we want to do is be able to connect to a secondary Salesforce instance in the same recipe, right? We want to pick some information from one of the subsidiary or child instance and keep the master instance in sync. So this is where we'll be able to add applications. And so we see here at the top that there's actually no limit to the number of applications we can connect to.
And I think that really is kind of the heart of the power, is being able to kind of chain these processes together, so you can move data from one application to the other, and that might trigger off some workflow that you need to have happen to n number of other applications, and other data that needs to flow to maybe more than one application. And you can do that all inside of one recipe. And so that's where, the things that really kind of get me passionate. And speaking about the Salesforce to Salesforce, I worked with one of our customers who actually had like a regional setup. So each of the regional businesses had their own instance of Salesforce, but like kind of HQ had like a corporate instance. And they with designing recipes and a certain kind of hub and spoke strategy, they were able to connect all of those to sync the important information that they needed to get from the regional offices up to corporate, and then from corporate back down to the different regional offices. Connecting 11 different instances of Salesforce together. It was a pretty interesting use case. So there's a lot of power that you can come up with inside of Workato, and you also kind of just think a little creatively. I'll toss out one other little creative tidbit that I think is fun. If you're in an organization that maybe you have a Salesforce developer, or maybe you don't have a Salesforce developer, or maybe the one you have is really busy, you can get really creative using Workato to create a recipe where the only application in the recipe is your own instance of Salesforce. So essentially using Workato to make some things happen that process builder, flow, or workflow rules don't let happen on their own. So that because you're able to get at the data in a different way by using the Workato platform. So that's also something just kind of creative. You can put your little creative hat on, some fun you could have there. I'm off my soapbox now. So we have one other use case to touch on, but we're going to touch on that one real quick so that we have time to answer any questions and talk a little bit about what the next Salesforce webinar is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sharon. So the last scenario that we have is really a complex one, but it's something that may resonate with many of you. And this is kind of a HR scenario, an onboarding use case where when you get a new employee on the first day, they need access to multiple systems because they're just involved with all these. So in a sales scenario, what one might need is a Salesforce account and a login account, as well as a ServiceNow a user. Right? We want to keep track of the employees in the organization, but also at the same time, we don't want this to be too automated. We want some form of human workflow involved. We want to say, hey, request permission and make this a little regulated. So Workato also has this feature where we inject some form of human tasks within the recipes. So what we're gonna see is a recipe that is really almost fancy. But what we want to really highlight is that the recipes that we've seen in the past two use cases, they're pretty straightforward. They're kind of a simple 4 or 5 steps recipes. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? The possibilities of creating a very extended, well-connected recipe is just a few steps away. So just working on simple recipes and adding to them, extending this workflow, and before you know it, you're going to end up with a recipe that looks almost daunting at first sight, but really interesting in terms of the workflow. what we see here is say, hey, whenever we have a new employee, we want to make sure that we search and make sure this user exists in Salesforce. And if they don't, let's create a task and let's make sure that this new sales employee receives his or her Salesforce account as soon as possible. Next, what we want to do is say, hey, do the same in ServiceNow. Make sure this user exists. And if they don't, because in this case, ServiceNow is it's a bit more tightly regulated. We want to say, hey, let's execute a request approval step and make sure that we get the right approval for the right person from the right person for this account. And finally, we say once this is done, we update everyone involved in this process. And also at the same time, if this employee is terminated from a company, we also want to extinguish. We want to remove access to all this sensitive information. What we can do is update, and we're not going to be able to see here, but what we want to do is just kill this account in your destination application. So we're not going to have time to go deep into this recipe, and also I figured this just requires too much context. So this is just a brief overview of one of the popular, interesting use cases with onboarding.
Yeah, thank you, Ishan. I mean, so some of the things that this use case kind of highlights is risk management. When you have an employee who is no longer an employee, you want to make sure that they don't have, access, that their users kind of decommissioned in certain applications, and automating that is ideal so that you don't have to, forget to do it in one application but not another. I think that's a great use case of how you can use integration and automation to kind of mitigate risk inside your corporation. And you'll see here, I mean, this recipe here is 25, 30 lines long, and it's got a lot of nested ifs, and you can get pretty robust. Your first recipe, if you're new to Workato, is not going to look like this, and that's perfectly okay. But it does not take long to go from creating a one-line recipe to creating a recipe like this once you start getting familiar with the user interface that Workato has. So we do have a couple of questions coming in. So I just want to go briefly over to the slide deck and just show you guys one slide. Ishan, it should be the next slide. There we go, perfect, thank you. So some of the things that we've covered here today, kind of around when building recipes, what are some of the best practices you want to think about in how you make sure that these Salesforce integrations are doing what you want, when you want, and how you want it. And so you can kind of bucket those into kind of 5 different groups. So the first one is trying to syncing information selectively. So using those trigger filters and conditional actions to make sure that only the information that you're only going to action something when you want it to happen, and not in any other use case. So if you're not familiar with trigger filters and conditional actions, there's material out in our knowledge base and our help site that can help you with that, and of course support is available too. Bidirectional syncs. So those are one of the most common use cases that we see. Or if people want information to go from one system and then want to have information updated in the source system when something changes or happens in that system that they sent the data to. And so one of the key things there is really around kind of making sure that those two systems stay in sync and that you have those external IDs aligned so that you can design your recipes to know to go back and update your original source when something changes. And so that's a strategy that is incredibly important. That kind of leads to itself to kind of syncing changes. As those changes happen, a payment is refunded, or the invoice was updated, that you then want to go and that you should be changing something in your ERP system or your finance system so that has information, and then getting that update back into Salesforce. Those cross-reference IDs are super, super critical to that. I will highlight one thing that we didn't cover on this call. We might cover it in the advanced Salesforce webinar, is some systems don't let you add custom objects. They're not as kind of robust and kind of able to build on like you are in Salesforce. So we do have the concept of a lookup table that you could use to kind of facilitate some mappings in the event that you need that. So if that is something that's curious to you, we believe we have documentation on that, and I think there was a prior product hour about that where you can watch the recording for that. And then lastly, let's not have duplicates. Like one of the things we all want to do is have clean data. So making sure that you incorporate that integration pattern where you're searching first before you create and updating a record if it already exists is super important, or else data can get out of hand very quickly. All right. I went through that pretty fast. If anybody has questions, you can definitely reach out to me on this, but I do want to take a look at some of the questions that have come in. We might not be able to get to all of them today, but as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, if you did ask a question, we will follow up with you individually if we don't get to them all. All right. One of the questions that came in from Angela, she was asking kind of like, what's the best practice when like you have a lot of similar tasks to do, where the process is similar, but it's not quite the same. Is there anything that we could do to make building recipes easier? Or is it just, you gotta build it all out every time?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a feature, and this is, we believe it's a really highly used feature, and it's a concept of a callable recipe. This is where you can extract out tasks that are repeated and can be used in multiple scenarios, multiple use cases. Create them in a separate recipe. Perform steps like do a search, followed by create an update for a single object. Right. This can be used in a few scenarios. So this is something we can pull out of a recipe, make it have it live as a separate recipe, and have it live as a callable recipe that can be invoked from other recipes. So an onboarding scenario might call a recipe that does a search for a user and create /update when appropriate, and return the ID of this user without and this is useful in a way that the principal recipe that performs this invocation doesn't have to worry about the logic involved in this. All it needs to do is say validate the presence of this user and return me the ID of this user. And this also can be used in other scenarios, like incident management or even HR related scenarios. So the concept of callable recipes is really powerful. Can be, callable recipes can even call other recipes, other callable recipes, to perform even more complex scenarios. But yes, we see it a lot with some of our savvy users, and this is a feature that can really simplify the look of your recipe and make it cleaner.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that callable recipes can help you kind of manage, a more complicated process that does have some overlap on a lot of your different systems, maybe interact with kind of some hub applications, but do it in a similar manner. I would also add that sometimes that might not be the appropriate solution, but sometimes just cloning a recipe and then just making those few couple of changes can also work for you. So we didn't cover it so much in this webinar, but there is the ability to kind of copy a recipe that you have and then just kind of make those couple of changes there. They're two distinct recipes. They don't call each other. So that can also be something that might work for you. Another question came in from Dan, and he was asking what the trigger was for this particular workflow. That was for the not the HR, the it was the HR scenario from the timing. It looks like that's what it was. Was it a form or a webhook or an event in the system or a poll? So could you, Ishan, just kind of briefly go over kind of the different ways triggers might work?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So Workato has a few types of triggers. The one we saw today was these are poll triggers. So what I mean by poll is at at regulated time intervals, we do a request. We go to Salesforce and say, we fetch all information that matches the SOQL queries, in this case, or all the conditions, and pull the entire list of events or news, updated records that happen. We bring it back and we process them one by one through a recipe. And what I'm going to do is show it here. Yeah, in Workday. So what we do is this is a poll. What we do is we say it checks for new events every 5 minutes. So we perform this poll at 5 minutes or 10 or 15 minute interval, and this really depends on your subscription. The other type of trigger that may appeal to everyone here is a real-time trigger, and this is something available for selected applications, but Salesforce is one of them. So this can be useful in scenarios where the use case is time sensitive. We want to be able to integrate this or perform some form of workflow in real time, and the 5 minutes can make or break a business process. So a real time trigger is useful in that way. There are also other forms of triggers, such as the batch as well as the bulk. These generally they are able to process multiple jobs, a group of jobs in a group of records in a single job. This is useful in reducing transaction count for your integration scenarios. And this will also be covered in greater detail in the next part of our product hour.
Thank you, Ishan. So we're right at noon Pacific, 3 o'clock Eastern. So we are going to wrap up today. There are still a question or two that we didn't get a chance to get to, but we will follow up with you individually to make sure that you get the answers that you want.